Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining us this morning or this evening or tomorrow, whenever whenever it is in your time zone. Um, I want to begin with a personal invitation to each one of you here. So I want you to think about the textiles and fabrics that have been handed down to you or that you have in your possession. Think about who did they belong to and what do they mean to you. And we'd love it if each one of you would share one of your heirloom textiles in the chat. And if you don't have any hand-me-down fabrics, maybe you could think about the textiles that you wear or that you have in your home that you might want to pass on to someone else one day. So we'd love to fill the chat full of real threads. So go wild. And now if we look at what's the format for this session, we've really broken it into 3 mini parts. So in a moment, I will hand over to Alke, who's a long-time collaborator of mine in particular, but now I feel like Lindsey might have ousted me. They've aligned in many ways. So
Never.
Alke is going to give a short talk about the wider concept of heirloom textiles. And that will then be followed with a short interview where I interview Lindsey and Alke about other cool projects that they've come across and also how they've used heirloom fabrics in their own personal work and practice. And then we're going to end in terms of our part in this by doing a mini reflection on a project that we ran together, the 3 of us, earlier this year, which was a pilot of an online making community, but all focused around reusing heirloom textiles. So we want to tell you a little bit about that and what happened, and then we'll hand over to Alison for Q&A, and I'm going to make sure we stick to time. So with that, I will hand over to Alke.
Thank you. Right. So this project really started with a fairly simple question. What do you do with the textiles that have been left behind? Maybe somebody's passed away. Maybe somebody just left. Maybe you left a job and still have part of a uniform or what you think of as like a work clothes, like a uniform. Maybe there are things you cannot wear anymore because your body changed somehow. So these are the textiles that might be found in a wardrobe, but they could also be like anywhere else. So they don't need to be like clothes. But often we find them in the domestic realm, like tea towels or duvet covers, tablecloth or towels, tarpaulins or napkins. And I think that a lot of people, and particularly women, have these bits and pieces. And if we kind of look in the chat, we see that you do, which is excellent. And we hang on to them, maybe not knowing why, or maybe just not knowing what to do with them, while also thinking that they are too important to just get rid of. They are sentimental somehow, and we see that you have at least some of them too, or thinking about what to do with your own stuff. And maybe you are actively looking for inspiration of what to do with them, and this is why you decided to come to the session. And it's okay if it's too soon, because maybe you still feel overwhelmed with what happened or what is going on, but you like the idea of having a project and method ready and waiting once you're ready. So that's really what this is kind of this session is about in a way. So let's start with the what are heirloom textiles? So I'm an oftentimes writer, and I've always been somewhat fascinated with history of words. So when we decided to center heirloom textiles in this talk, it seemed an easy first step to try and figure out what heirloom means and where the term comes from. So we have heiress, which seems pretty straightforward as something you inherit, and geloma, which would become the root of loom, which originally was just a term for pretty much any tool. So an heirloom is a tool that you inherit. And I particularly like that it includes what we now think of as a loom because it's a textile term. And, as an aside, I also think it's pretty cool that the word originally meaning any tool shifted to become a specific tool to weave on, because I think that shows how important the making of textiles within cultures is. Anyway, I digress. So on the next slide, you can see our heirloom textiles. So the idea of heirloom textiles, as we understand them, is that these are textiles that you somehow inherit, and we mean that in the wildest possible sense, because they don't necessarily have to have been willed to you by a person. So in this image, we can see on the right an heirloom fabric of Katy and Lindsey's a duvet cover from their Nana's house. And on the left is a coat that I used to be quite obsessed with. So this is an old coat, which was my own. But it has like very sentimental connotations because of where I bought it. And then I basically traveled the world with it. So that wasn't inherited from another person, but rather from past me. But I still consider it in this category of fabric. So it's not necessarily kind of what it doesn't have to have come from another person. It could also be from yours, but the sentimentality is still there. So let's look at the next slide. What is this talk about? It's really an introduction to the multitude of inspirations that are out there, the intersection of textiles and storytelling. There are lots of examples out there and practitioners that work in this realm with a multitude of different approaches. But for me, there are a number of dimensions that are worth exploring. The first is about what is produced. The second is about how it is produced. And if we're looking at the what, I think there are two ends of a spectrum that stand out. The visual narrative that shows images of some sort, maybe inspired by locations or people, and the approach that encodes data, which is often more abstract. There are also a lot of really cool projects and examples that seem to have their roots in quilt making, and I'm calling them here memorial quilts. And they often merge the figurative and the abstract with a healthy dose of sentimental textiles too. When it comes to the how, there are also a number of ways to consider. Namely, there's the individual work, the collaboration where people make parts individually to then be joined together somehow, or there's communal making where people work on the same piece at the same time. And as so often happens when you try to pin something down, these are all somewhat extremes and mostly things will fall somewhere in the in-between. But I think this provides a useful framework to think about projects. So let's have a look at what's out there. And for the visual narrative, that's an illustrative approach. So we're talking about making little illustrations, and I think the quintessential example here is the bio tapestry, which in actual fact is not a tapestry at all. And I can talk about this at length, but I will not because it's a bit nerdy. So it's the visual narrative is like an illustrative approach, and this could range from simple outlines to very complex thread paintings or collages using different fabrics. This is all about the images, just like the bio tapestry kind of tells the story of this battle. In the next picture, we can see the work of artist embroiderer Lynn Setterington, and she uses simple shapes and simple stitches to reflect on everyday life. Of the stitched vignettes on the left here, she says, and I quote, "This early work from the 1980s is still important to me as a form of tactile social history. These small fragmentary pieces document my move from a small village in Yorkshire to student life in the capital. They are vignettes of working class life, capturing markets and street scenes in Yorkshire and South London," unquote. One of the traditions Setterington uses is the one of kantha quilts that are traditionally made exclusively by women and often created from recycled materials and like basically old sari cloth. Here, she created her kanthas on the right that document domestic objects, and in this case, items found on her bathroom shelf. These are things that we are often taken for granted, but are nonetheless part of one's own story. These are ways of documenting snapshots of your own or somebody else's life. And I picked this one particular, this work, because it reminded me of when I was helping my best friend clear out her mom's house after her mom had passed away, and we had all the stuff in the bathroom. And, obviously we needed to get rid of it, but also, kind of how do you keep it? And it's kind of that there's something that kind of spoke to me about that documentation in this work, of this really like normal thing, but it can become so poignant. Right. Although much more recent, this project, the Battle of Prestopans tapestry, was very close to what we think the production of the Bayeux tapestry was like. So somebody commissioned it, they designed it, and then they got volunteers. Mainly, they seem to have been local to Prestopans to do the stitching. There was a little bit of interaction between the images and the stitches. For example, a number of them came from a special town. Unfortunately, I forgot which, but the designer decided to put in an image referencing that town for them in a way. But the next project I want to show you has a much bigger agency from the stitches, because here they were shaping the designs too. This project, again commonly called a tapestry, although it consists of embroidered panels, and they aren't joined either, but they travel together. So this is a really cool collaborative project. It's the Scottish Diaspora Tapestry, and it centers around the people and places which connect Scotland to its global diaspora. And here, people were encouraged to send in their own stories or the stories of their ancestors, complete with research, because this should have been historically accurate, and photographs to tell about the people, events, places, and possibly also suggest suitable quotations. You could even suggest your own design based on a provided grid, and then a designer working on the project turned these stories into a panel, which the person who kind of provided the story got to check a visual proof of. And then the people who provided the story got a linen panel with a drawn outline and wool to do the stitching of their own panel. Once they finished it, they kind of returned it to the project to be exhibited with the other panels. So you kind of had that agency of actually telling your own story or the story of your ancestors, but it still is designed by the same person. So it kind of becomes a holistic whole in a way. On the next slide, we see the one of the panels of the Leeds tapestries, a community arts project to celebrate the millennium and Leeds. This was devised by Kate Russell, and it's 16 panels that show off different themes of Leeds life, like education, health, transport, industry, or here, community spirit. And they were worked on together by different community groups. This is really fun because it uses all different techniques. There's embroidery, but photo printing, rag rugging, attachments of all sorts of different fabrics and buttons. And if you ever get to go to Leeds, can just be seen at the library in Leeds. So it's kind of open for everybody. So you can just wander in and have a look at it, at them. And there's so much detail in all the panels. It's really cool. So this is the illustrative approach. Then the other one that I kind of really like is the idea of encoded data. The data-driven approach is much more abstract in nature and outcome. It encodes collected data and usually ends up with an abstract image that can only be properly understood if one has the key. This image, for example, writes words from a dictionary by using different types of beads for every letter. This is by Jordan Cunliffe, who's also featured on my next slide. Here in Life Stories, she uses scraps of fabric to incorporate smaller pieces of sentimental textiles into the work. This piece, made during the 2020 COVID lockdown, is about her missing her university house share from years ago. And it includes 3,026 stitches, one for every day she and her friends had moved out of the house. And it also adds these sentimental fabrics. And that she strongly associated with that time. A pair of pajamas that she lived in until she wore them out on the bottom right, and some cheap floral fabric that she had used to upcycle some of the old bedroom furniture. So it was like her way of kind of reflecting on this and almost grieving for that house share at this time where you were so isolated. And the next slide we see. So while this is individual work, It's an example that plays into a much larger collaborative project because this is about climate awareness. Bethan Nemesh regularly makes quilts based on temperature, and this one is from 2021, using weather data from whatever location that she was in. Each feather represents a month, with a maximum temperature of each day on one side of the quill and the minimum temperature on the other, as other than the feather quills. An embroidered V on the quill indicates a change in climate with a location in Braille. And the extra dots in the dark red represent the degrees that went above the maximum temperatures in her preset temperature scale. So there are many collaborative projects that map temperature change, most notably the Tapestry project. They're often using knitting or crochet. I wanted to show a textile-based one. There's also kind of, there are loads out there. And if you're kind of interested in that, I would say check out the Tapestry project because they're all kind of pretty amazing. And yeah, which is kind of cool. Here is a communal, as in co-created example of a quilt that encodes data. It was made by event attendees of the 2023 Western New York Maker Fair. The color of each stripe represents the direction an individual traveled to attend the event, and the strips of fabric are cut to length, indicate distance traveled. The arrangement is trying to evoke the shoreline of Lake Erie and quilted with its outline, although I'm not sure we can see that on this picture. And there's some extra hand quilting showing the border between the US and Canada. This is part of the Material Interactions Data-Driven Community Quilting project led by Rachel Ivy Clark, which draws on the communal traditions of quilting to create interactive data-driven patchwork quilts at community events throughout the New York State. How is this communally made? Well, the relevant data is collected at an event and then pieced into a quilt top on the spot by the artist or the participants, to then be quilted and finished by the artist after the event. And then it comes back to the next event to be kind of shown off there. So in a way, what gets created here is a memory of a particular event, a memorial quilt in its own right. But then there's also memorial quilts, which we'll look at now. And patchwork quilts are usually a huge source of inspiration when it comes to looking at telling stories with textiles. They also often reuse fabrics. This is after all where patchwork quilts come from, reusing what you had to make something new. So it's no wonder that there are not just numerous individual examples, but also whole categories of quilts that can be classified as memorial quilts, like this one that was made in response to the Grenfell Tower disaster. A lot of these quilts contain bits of clothing that had belonged to a lost loved one, or the one who was grieving, with a mindful act of stitching parts or the process of hand quilting, providing time to process grief. But it can also process rage, which is why I think that protest quilts also fall in this category. They're often collaborative and communal in nature. Huge projects where one artist or a dedicated group organizes the project and asks other people, often from around the world, to contribute a piece or block, as it is called in quilting lingo. The next example, for example, it calls for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza and Palestinian liberation. And here has been unfurled across the steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, which I think is sort of the quilting equivalent of a flash mob. So pretty cool, kind of seeing all these, all these blocks made by different people come together in this massive, massive thing. Another category that we can find are signature, autograph, or friendship quilts. These are quilts that are often built around signatures who are either inscribed or sometimes also embroidered. Sometimes they're inscribed and then embroidered across, over the signature to make it more permanent. And there might be signatures of people who gave money for a fundraising effort, or they could be people that are remembered, again, often using scraps of textiles belonging to them in order to build a memory. And then the last thing I want to show is the coffin quilt, which is endlessly fascinating to me, and I think also to Katy and Lindsey. So here we see little coffins on the bottom, They represent people associated with the quilt, like with the family. And once those people die, their coffins get moved into the central cemetery area. Often the coffins are made from sentimental fabric, or I would imagine get augmented with scraps that remind the people of the deceased while this transfer is going on. These are very much a keepsake of the family, an heirloom in itself. And I like I can't, I mean, I think this is like a really interesting object. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find any more information on this because I think it's such a cool kind of concept and something you have this idea that, oh, that actually, maybe that once a child is born, you kind of add a new coffin, which is a bit morbid in a, but it's because it's on the outside, it's kind of not that bad. And so, but then it kind of, you grow up with it and you kind of see it and you kind of remember the people that came before you. And yeah, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this whistle stop tour through different ways of using textiles to tell stories and maybe got inspired by ways in which you could use your own heirloom textiles in a similar way. And I just see that I ran through this because, um, we don't have that much time, but I hope it wasn't too fast. Yeah.
Thank you, Alke. My goodness, I've been writing down so many of my own ideas just on that deluge of inspiration. I'm particularly struck by how textiles can be dynamic, which I hadn't really thought about before. So, yeah, um, I'm itching to get going now. But before I do that, I would like to give the opportunity to bring Lindsey in at this point. And I guess my first question for you, Linz, is so Alke's introduced us to a lot of artists and approaches there. I wondered if you wanted to share some other artists and projects that you think have been inspiring.
Yeah, it was really hard to narrow down when we were thinking about this. But one of my favorites, and probably sort of on my mind because I've come to them late, I think, or recently, is Zach Foster. And what I love about Zach's work is that it's quite anarchic and punk in terms of its sort of approach being very messy, if you like. There's and the way that he finds fabrics. So I know that he's got a huge stash because sometimes he posts his workroom and it being a massive mess and saying he feels shame around it. But I also know that there have been times where I think a bit like on the left here, where you can see the headscarf, he's found textiles in the street or in the trash, and instead of cutting them up and them becoming sort of traditional patchworks, he will applique them or patch them in as if they are on the person's body, or maybe even in the way that he's found them laying in the street. So a quite a different contemporary and quite punk approach to using fabrics, finding fabrics, reusing fabrics. Um, and the kind of person who's prepared to make a piece that came to him in a dream. And then also we see a graveyard quilt, which maybe is a bit like the coffin quilt. It was to do with him finding out about his sort of family links to enslaved people and a cemetery on this particular ground. And he kind of patched this stuff together, and it really helped him to explore feelings around that and the kind of the politics and the his particular family history. Um, shall I move on? Another one, which I guess people might already know about in the audience, but if you haven't, this is the Loose Ends project, which I only found out about when we became dead good. I think it was one of the things that probably popped up for us with the algorithm, or maybe people were sending it to us. And I'm just going to read this little panel to give you an intro to it. So, who loose ends are. The idea for loose ends came about when founders Jennifer Simonik and Macy Kaplan, both avid knitters, realized that they had a shared experience. Friends would often ask them to finish blankets, sweaters, or other projects left undone by deceased loved ones. They always do so enthusiastically, understanding what it feels like to wear something a loved one has made. So there's the two founders there on the left, and a picture here of somebody's dad who is clutching this unfinished sweater made by his wife who died, and the daughter being able to find somebody through loose ends, a volunteer who is going to complete that sweater for her father, who I think at the time of that photo was 99 years old. So the stories that come out of loose ends are very weep-inducing, but also like the best thing for me about being human. Um, I feel like Alka might have volunteered to be a finisher, a volunteer. I'm not sure. I might be making that up. Um, but I just think it's absolutely incredible, wonderful, heartwarming. But then that triggered this memory for me of having sort of been involved in my own loose end project before I knew about loose ends. Here in the middle, you can see this. This is me with the shorter hair on the right in the 1990s. And this is my friend, also called Lindsey, on the left. So we were friends, and as you do, kept in touch by sort of Facebook and social media. And I was aware that Lindsey had been diagnosed with cancer and had quite a prolonged journey with that. In 2015, she understood that her life was coming to an end. And as crafters, we often bonded over craft and sewing. She showed me this quilt that she'd been making for her son and was very much worried about it being completed before she died. And we were texting, I think, in the November 2015 about how she was feeling concerned. And I was saying, send it to me. She was depleted in energy. And she'd managed to get the topper to this unbelievable, beautiful standard. And I said, send it to me. I don't know how to finish this for you, but I'll be able to find somebody who does know. And I was able to, so that's it laid out on my floor, ready to send to people in the community to get help. And one of my best friends, Steph, her mother-in-law, was able to take it off me. So I had to courier that up to Whitley Bay, I think, or somewhere up north, northeast in the UK. And she completed it and backed it. You can see here, this is a text from me to Lindsey's husband, Chris, to say that I'd managed to get it done via Dorothy, who's in her 80s. And really, really sadly, we didn't manage to get it back to Lindsey. She died 3 days after I received the quilt. But she knew it was in good hands, and we were able to have this finished quilt back to her son, who was about 9 years old or 10 years old. And there's something about the fact that she'd made this with her hands and the fact that it had been finished into this sort of weighty, tactile embrace of a piece that really comforted a whole community in the wake of her death. And we were lucky enough for Chris to share pictures of her son swaddled, with it around him and beaming. And it's a very sad and upsetting story, but there's something here around the healing properties, I think, of collaboration, of the love that goes into these kinds of items, and the fact that that finished item will be with him for the rest of his life and possibly children if he has children. Anyway, it's a big one. Let me see if I can move on. Katie's
So, um, so thank you for sharing those, Linz. It shows there's an infinitesimal I can't say it. There's so many projects that we can learn about and use as our own inspiration. But I also wanted to give a little bit of time to Lindsey and Alke to talk about how they've used heirloom fabrics in their own personal projects. So Linz, you go first.
Yeah, so again, really hard to choose and narrow down, but I've chosen this ruff, which I feel like nobody else is saying in the whole of the world today. Um, this ruff I made in 2017 for a party. And I have this is like an alter ego. I dress as a clown whenever I can. I'm not entirely sure why that is, but it is something that happens. And I really got into it in 2017 and decided that if you're going to be a clown, you really need a ruff. This is the ruff, and the fabric is Katy and I think it's our aunt's bridesmaid dress fabric left over from when she was a bridesmaid for for our dad's first cousin. So it's probably from the 50s, the 1950s. And the bit that I used was found in our nan's cupboard when my dad and I went down to Glastonbury, which is in the UK, which you've probably all heard of, not the festival, just a house. And we were clearing out, and a lot of the cupboards you don't tend to go in when you're a kid at your grandparents' house. So going through all these cupboards, which I'd never opened before, revealed this huge stash of unused or like part used fabrics. And as an art student at the time, I brought as many as I could home with me. So I've had this fabric in my stash for probably another decade. And again, like Alka was saying at the beginning, it's hard to know what to do with fabrics like this because they're like valuable in their own right, but they're also kind of crying out for something to be done with them. So this one spoke to me because of the color, but also because I don't know if you can see, but I kept the ends raw. So it's kind of floofy. It's like a crinoline. Um, and I found a video of how to make a ruff, and I made a ruff. And then you can see in 2025, that's me wearing it again. This was earlier this year at a 50th birthday party, and I actually wore it this weekend at another 50th birthday party. So that's my favourite heirloom project to date. I'm going to move on to.
Well, this is a shared, so you
Yeah.
two need to explain what's happening here.
So the last time we gave this talk, this was another one of the ones that this was what I was going to do next, what I felt I wanted to do next. And Alka hadn't seen that until we actually went through the slides at the actual talk. And afterwards, we both agreed that we wanted to do it together, and really as a sort of follow-up to the Quilty Pleasures making community where we'd been in a sort of regular evening slot making together, and we missed it. So we decided to embark upon this together. And you buy the project from Madison, who's pictured here, and you make it yourself with whatever fabrics you've got. So mine's at the top here, and the mustard coloured fabric is actually our grandmother's, the same grandmother from the same stash. It's her three-piece suite that she must have upholstered herself because lots of this fabric was left. So there's some scrap fabric in here, there's some reused cushions, but there are also heirloom fabrics in there for me. Alka.
And yeah, and for me, I wanted to use like old work shirts for that. But then I had this whole thing and I had to lose weight, and now those old work shirts fit me again. So then I didn't want to cut them up. So I used only stuff from my stash, but there weren't heirloom textiles. But I love the idea of this as a bag that is something that you have like almost like close to your heart. And I just had to make it. And the way that the pattern is set up is that she really encourages you to kind of like put your own stamp on it and design your own kind of version. And then I yeah, maybe took it slightly overboard with making two sides
It's wonderful.
and
Yeah,
adding
and we did
another
it
pocket.
it was asynchronous as well for us, wasn't it? We weren't together online at the same time. We sort of Alka cracked on because she wanted to take hers away with her. And then seeing what she was doing immediately, it sort of incited a desire to make for me. So we ended up making them in very kind of close tandem. And now we're wondering what's next. Maybe the bird bag.
Ooh,
Amazing.
yeah.
Let's move on so Alke can share one of her heirloom
Yeah,
ones.
so again, not really made of fabrics that are heirloom fabrics, because I didn't really have any until quite recently. I only had like my own stuff. But so this was a quilt I made as a 5-year review at work, and so it's kind of, it takes the idea of the patchwork quilt. And it kind of uses kind of like pictures of like of documents. Maybe you can kind of see there's some type on there, so it's kind of things that I've written maybe or I've illustrated and things, and kind of color coded them and kind of put them together. I had like a huge kind of there's a version of post-its which I would kind of use to kind of just see what have I actually achieved in these 5 years, and then I kind of put kind of put it together to be able to talk about, well, these are, and it really helped me identify where I was going and what projects were sort of done. And then on the other side, I kind of made these embroideries, which were basically envisioning my work life as a map, and then yeah, embroidered that. And yeah, so that's like my favorite, or one of my favorite projects.
Thank you both. So we just wanted to reflect briefly on how we used all of that inspiration from Alke and Lindsey's own projects, but also this wealth of other artists' work to inspire a 6-week pilot project that we ran in May and June this year. Next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, we set up, so me, Lindsey and Alke set up this small group online maker community for just 6 hours across 6 weeks. And the idea was to come together and learn embroidery techniques, but also to share our own stories around life and grief. And we found ourselves during those 6 hours, can you go back to the other slide, Linz? Over those 6 hours, really slowing down during the sessions. And across the sessions, it allowed us to think about how we each might use our own heirloom fabrics. So we experimented every week making flags. And Alke very much, I mean, it took me a little while as a non-sewer. It took me a little while to get my head around. I thought I was going to be using my dad's denim shirt, my nan's handkerchiefs. I thought I'd be using them to make bunting. And Alke was like, no, please use scraps, like use your worn out dungarees to play and experiment. And that's very much what the Quilty Pleasures project was about. It was about, Alke would send us, before each session, she'd send us beautifully hand illustrated techniques. So whether it was showing us how to do cantha stitch, how to do applique, how to do, look how I've learned these, Alke, how to do couching, or stem stitch. Am I right?
There is a stem stitch, yeah.
Yes. And also exploring how we could code our own personal data. So one of the things I thought about was, the number of days between our dad being given a stage 4 cancer diagnosis and how many days he lived after that, and then trying to represent that in stitches and in what he was able to do in his life during that time. So it really, Alke's expertise around embroidery and stitching, it really gave us a chance, this small group for 6 weeks, to make stitching into ceremony, really, into ceremony and ritual. And next slide, please, Linz. And here's just some examples of the sorts of bunting flags that different people in the group made. So we made rustic, you can see quite a few rustic bunting flags there. We made rustic flags, we made neat flags, we made framed flags. We played with representing meaningful objects using different stitches. We played with letters and text. We used applique and simple shapes to illustrate personal landmarks. And like I said, we had a go at turning our own data into encoded stitches. And it was amazing. And I can say that because I was really, I mean, we said it was a collaboration. It was really Lindsey and Alke, and I was there as actual participant. So I was amazed, as someone who describes herself as a non-sewer, at how achievable it was. And so Lindsey and Alke, I think, did use heirloom textiles. I think one of the other participants did as well, but the rest of us, we used scrap materials to experiment. But now we're in a position where we can design and plot our own, reusing the heirloom textiles that we have to create something meaningful to pass on, or to share our stories while we're alive. So yeah, the feedback we got was incredibly positive about how much of a community was created for that, you know, in not a lot of time, really. And I suppose for that reason, like, limiting these kind of groups to sort of 10 maximum is probably a good idea, to give everyone a chance to share. So we don't have another one planned yet, but if there is any interest, get in touch with Alke and we'll set something up. Next slide. So that is the end of the formal bit of the heirloom fabrics talk experience. And then we just wanted to say something about what Dead Good are doing next. So we've got Lindsey's installing an art exhibition in Macclesfield next week that will run for 3 months. And then we've also found out that we're one of the challenge ambassadors for the 64 Million Artists, that's an organisation, their January challenge, where there's a different creative prompt every day in January. And we've been picked to do January the 24th. And our prompt is create a funeral for, and then there's a prompt around how you might do that for something, for not necessarily a person, but how you would give a funeral, make a funeral, do a funeral for something in your life. And then finally, this is the first time we've told anyone this, but we are going to be doing our first Kickstarter campaign all throughout the month of February. Lindsey has written a children's book and illustrated it, and so we want to involve people in our project to share the Midnight Moth with many other people. And then next slide. So if you'd like to stay in touch, and we'd love you to, please feel free to sign up to our Substack, which is called The Mortal Portal. Please follow us on social. We're very, for those of you that do, it's we're not passive on social media. So if you follow us and like things and say things, we are going to be your friends. And then you can have a bit more of a look about what we're about on our website. And do, on the landing page, do listen to the music video that Lindsey made about Dead Good. If you do nothing else, watch that. And then Alke has her own Substack, and she's just set herself up as the crafting correspondent. So please do follow Alke. We're going to see much more from her over the next year. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Is
you.
it over to me now?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Most of the questions have been about, can I be on the next Quilty Pleasures, please? Is that going to happen again?
It can happen again.
Yeah, I mean, if there's definitely if we get like a group of 10 just from here, then we can run it pretty much immediately, I would guess. But yeah, so if you kind of send us an email, maybe send me an email specifically for the Quilty Pleasures, so that Dead Good don't have to worry about like another bit of admin with all these cool projects coming up. You probably don't have the time.
All of our details are in the chat, and I think there'll be a PDF in there that you can download, and all of our contact details, including Alke's email, is on there. Sorry.
So that's
so
engage.
Send me an email, let me know, and then I'll get back to you and to say we're going to do one or not, or
that sounds great. So I have put all those linking details in the chat, and also the ladies very kindly put gave a further reading document that I have also put in the chat for participants to download if you want to look at other things. The first question we had was, we're all nerdy here. Why is the Baya not a tapestry, Alke?
Because in order to be a tapestry is woven. So the image is woven into the thing. The bio tapestry is embroidered on, so it's kind of linen. I think it's linen that you embroider on. So it's like a different way of making it. And yeah, so there's a thing called tapestry weaving, where you kind of, you weave the image into the warp, no, into the weft. And that's not what it is. Does that make sense?
Do you know why it's called a tapestry then?
So this was when somebody found it in an archive, and they obviously didn't know what they were talking about, and they called it they misclassified it as a tapestry, and that just stuck. And it stuck in a way that now in English we call things a tapestry just when it's something that kind of like tells a story, like the bio tapestry. So presto pans, also not tapestry woven. The lead stuff, those aren't woven. Like, so but now we kind of we use tapestry as, but weavers always think, no, it's not, because it isn't.
Because I think here also needlepoint is called tapestry sometimes as well when you're making
I think it comes from that kind of, so that illustrative thing, but really it's not.
It's very, very interesting. I was thinking about what you said about the fish being close to your heart, and then the boy being swaddled in his mother's quilt. And as you were talking about that, I pulled this over me, and you got the fish there, is it? Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. I was telling Alke and Katy and Lindsey beforehand that this is these are squares that my mother made. Hands never idle. She didn't know what she was going to do. Hold it up. Yeah. That she could not watch television without using her hands as well. So when she died, I got all of these squares, and I crocheted them together, and thinking it's the perfect size. It's a perfect size for a child's first bed. And I'm nearly 60. I'm like, where are my grandchildren? So I'm making things. I've pieced the quilt already, but it's not going to be in the closet anymore. It's been in the closet since I made it. Why not have it around me? Why not have it be for me? And I was thinking about how often these textiles are a hug. They feel like a hug. Um, my son wears his grandfather's fleece, and he told me yesterday, like, our cat loves that fleece. Like he was feeling like she's connected with his grandfather as well. Um, so I do you have a feeling about women and this? I know male quilters, we know Zach, there's that, but can we say predominantly women are holding these things, making these things and holding them to themselves? Or
I
It's
think
interesting, isn't it? Traditionally, yes. Currently, probably also. I don't know if any of you've watched the Netflix special about, I think it's just called Quilters, and it's in a men's prison.
oh
Um,
yes.
like fabulous, amazing, very short documentary. Everyone should watch it. Um, I guess I'm not sure. Anyone else?
I think I'd like to share a personal thing, which isn't so much around gender, but is around intuition around some of this work. So when our dad died, and so we'd been involved in weaving his willow coffin before he died. And when the coffin came home, again, while dad was still alive, it was unlined. And we'd asked for it had been offered to us, but we'd said no, please, we'll have it empty, because Lynn's had this idea, even though she, proficient sewer, but she had this idea that she could stitch together um, a lining that would incorporate family archived fabrics. And so um, there was a gap at the top where she was able to include some of our grandmothers, so our dad's mum, some of her, was it a bathroom curtain material? I can't remember
I think
which
it was the
fabric it was.
outdoor like seating set.
Oh yes, so that was kind of at the head, wasn't it, of the coffin.
Yeah, and
So
it was
Alison,
purely
going back
because I made it wrong. I was making it out of fabric I think that you'd used to re upholster some loom chairs from our Nan's cottage and possibly tablecloths from either of our weddings, and I'd measured wrong, so there was this weird gap, and it just was beautiful, a lovely fluffy
so
little thing.
so there's something there about how it doesn't always have to be planned,
Yeah.
but having the heirloom fabrics and textiles not quite at the back of your mind, allowing them to come forward for when mistakes happen or when opportunities arise. Because even though that wasn't planned, how beautiful is it for dad's body to be put into the coffin surrounded with materials that we've used as a family over decades, and that little, I mean, it's giving me goosebumps now, but that little piece that his mum had handled and turned into things through his childhood lives. So yeah, I think maybe that's not gendered
Yeah.
necessarily, but I love that it does, you don't have to be an expert to be able to take part in this kind of
But
grief work.
I do
Exactly.
think there's a gendered aspect though, because but I think it's changing. When I went to school, we had to choose between woodwork and needle, kind of like
Yes.
needlework basically. Um, and I mean, at least I was able to choose, but it was predominantly the girls did the needlework and the boys did the woodwork. I had a friend, as a girl, she had to do needlework, and the boys didn't have to do anything. They had
Yeah.
a free period, right? So that's not happening anymore, but it's I think it's slowly changing, but culture was kind of pushing women in one direction and men in the other direction. And that's why I
Yeah.
think yeah.
I think also it was beautiful. I'm glad I asked that because in the chat we've got now my dad did this, or behind me I've got things that were put together from the men who did. So that you'll see that in the chat as well. I
Yeah.
do think that at least in American culture, the make, do, and mend was very strong. The quilting from saved fabric was a very practical choice, but became a very emotional choice, which I think is really important as well, that you're saving stuff, you're making rugs, and that you then are walking on, and they're imbued with your body's oils, you know, that kind of thing that we're feeling and smelling. Somebody mentioned that, the smell of an aftershave, you know, in that kind of thing. I do have to stop you. I know nobody wants this to stop,